Welcome to Green Dot Daily. I'm Maria Marino. We're live every weekday at 3 Eastern on the Action app and YouTube channel. Today on the show, we'll get NHL picks and analysis from Andy Macneil and talk college hoops with Mike Calabrese. But first, we got to catch up on the NBA. A lot going on. 5 players, including Jimmy Butler, were suspended without pay for a fight on the court between the Heat and Pelicans Friday night. The Hawks have announced Trae Young will have surgery on his left pinky finger and miss at least 4 weeks. And the Lakers called out inconsistent officiating with only 8 free throw attempts, none in the second half of yesterday's loss to the Suns, who had 19. It's that time when we call upon our NBA Commander-in-Chief and President of Buckets, Matt Moore, to give his weekly State of the Union address. Matt?
Thank you, Maria, my fellow NBA fans. Glad to be with you as always on a Monday to give you the good, the bad, and the other this week in the NBA. And it's going to be a pretty positive one. We're past that nonsense that we've seen with the All-Star weekend. We don't have all that much for me to be angry about, so I'm actually pretty positive this week. And we'll start with the Milwaukee Bucks, who might just be getting their act, their stuff, dare I say, their shit together. The Bucks are 8th in defense since Adrian Griffin was fired, despite their good record. And you could tell that their process was better even as they were losing games. And those of us that cover the league nightly would keep saying, like, okay, they keep losing games, but it looks a lot better in terms of their organization on the floor. Now they've actually started to turn the corner. And we're seeing that their Milwaukee this season is 11-7 versus top 10 teams in point differential. So why isn't their record better? They're just 10-8 versus the middle 10 teams, many of those coming to the Indiana Pacers, which are a tough matchup for them. Milwaukee's a good team. They're a great team at their absolute ceiling. The question's going to be about, can they build the consistency that they're going to need in order to make a title run? Damian Lillard needs to play better. He's started to play better since winning the three-point contest and costing me a fair amount of money. Thanks again, Damian. They are actually starting to get their stuff together. Now, the bench is still a concern. And the biggest reason why you can't necessarily be a futures buyer on these Milwaukee Bucks, even at a lower buy point, is Doc Rivers. He's just got too much experience in blowing 3-1 leads, in having an inability to adjust in the playoffs. I still worry about those things. But if you're downgrading the Bucks or dismissing them, it's time to turn that around. The Bucks are going to make noise in the Eastern Conference playoffs. How much is probably going to depend on Doc Rivers and Damian Lillard. As for the bad this week, we're going to talk about Draymond Green really briefly here, because the important thing to keep in mind is that Draymond Green has a lot that he brings to the table as a media member now, as a member of the, quote, new media. Yes, needs to stop hitting people in faces. He seems to have addressed that issue. Yes, he needs to stop barking at the officials like he did in Sunday's game versus the Nuggets. He gets away with more, by the way, than anyone else in the league. On his podcast, though, he's had some comments recently, which I think we need to talk about. First, he called out Anthony Edwards for his effort and interest level in the All-Star game. Yes, the All-Star discussion is back. But Draymond didn't call out anyone else. He just called out Anthony Edwards for not taking it seriously. Didn't mention anything about LeBron James, who basically showed up in Indiana 45 minutes before the thing started. He didn't talk at all about any of the other players. I thought his guy Steph Curry played pretty hard, so hard to blame him there. But he didn't call out anybody else. Don't just call out Anthony Edwards. Call out everybody. If you're going to target somebody, you got to target that entire group of all-stars, even if Edwards had more on the table. But more concerning was his comments about Miles Bridges. Bridges went to Michigan State, and obviously those two are close. They're close friends. But after a game in which there was a kerfuffle at the end of the game following a break of the quote-unquote unwritten rules between the Hornets and the Warriors, and there was a little bit of a scuffle, Draymond decided to call out Grant Williams, talking about how he was going to pray for Grant Williams, et cetera, invoking Kevin Durant, who he continues to have barbs with. But he also said this about Miles Bridges. He says, "That's my guy. I'm never going to have anything. He can do no wrong," is what he said. Bridges, 2 years ago, faced very serious legal issues after a domestic violence incident with his partner that netted him a suspension the following season. Bridges got paid and is likely to get an even bigger contract this summer. And that's a separate issue for a different time. Green has a responsibility as the face of the NBA. I understand that they're friends. I understand that these issues are between, he feels probably that it's a personal issue. But as the face of the league, which Draymond is going to become after his playing days are over, there's a responsibility to be a little bit aware of what that looks like to people who are concerned with domestic violence, particularly any fan who's a woman. It's an issue that needs to be addressed. Green's an amazing commentator, and when he's doing the actual basketball side, he's phenomenal. His breakdown of Sunday's game versus the Nuggets, where he credited Jokic and how he's improved, and Aaron Gordon, it was terrific stuff. He's just got to be a little bit more aware of what life looks like outside of the NBA circles. The Green's got a lot to offer, but he's got to be careful with how he uses the power that he's been able to build with his voice.
Matt, I couldn't agree more with regard to your breakdown of Draymond Green. He is a really talented commentator, and there is such a combination now of being an athlete and also being a quote unquote member of the media. And you have to learn to have accountability for your statements. You can't just go on saying whatever you want and expect there not to be consequences. Like, Green needs to recognize the responsibility that he holds as somebody with a ton of influence and a ton of impact. Do I think he meant anything by Miles Bridges with regard to his activity off the court? No, but it's tone deaf when you're going on and on praising this person, saying he can, quote, do no wrong, when he is serving probation due to a plea deal in a very serious domestic violence case in which he sat out an entire season to address. So I have to just agree that Draymond, like, take into account the impact that you have, and you got to just think a little bit more about what you're saying. I think that's super, super important. But what else you got for us?
In lighter news, let's talk about the Clippers rebrand that dropped on Monday. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. It doesn't look cartoonish like some of their other rebrand efforts in terms of the different logos and things like that. It's clean, it's professional. The blue and red are really sharp, especially the red jersey, I think, looks particularly great. And this is all part of their efforts to kind of rebrand and build their own kind of space in the LA market. They're never going to be the Lakers. No one is thinking they're going to be the Lakers. They're trying to build something from the ground up. They move out of crypto.com next year into their own arena, and I'm really excited for this era of Clippers basketball. A lot of people don't really realize that Jerry Buss, the late Dr. Buss, actually brought over Donald Sterling into that deal. He's the reason Donald Sterling bought the Clippers and moved them to Los Angeles. Not a lot of people realize that Buss and Sterling were linked like that. Might want to keep that in mind. But since then, they've been tied. And really, if you want to break out of the idea of the Clippers as the little brother to the Lakers and try and build your own identity, it's not just going to take the new arena. It's going to take a championship, obviously, but it also is going to have to be an identity that you can really feel proud of, that fans can feel proud of. Love the rebrand. Think it's a really good step for the Clippers franchise.
I have quite a few thoughts on this rebrand, and I do want to praise the Clippers for what they're doing. First of all, I can't even imagine, like, being here in New York, having two teams in close proximity sharing an arena in the NBA is just like, it's unfathomable. And so this is like a huge necessary step. And what I do appreciate about the Clippers, apparently, internal studies have shown that they've actually doubled their fan base in the last 7 years. And a big part of that is obviously, you bring in Paul George, you bring in Kawhi Leonard, and, forming this new identity. I agree. The logo and the design, super clean, which I love. I feel for marketing folks who have to create a logo for a team whose mascot isn't very, clear what it is. Like, I looked up what is a Clipper. It's like a ship, a sailing ship. So if you look at the logo, it's like, okay, what is that? And then you're like, oh, okay, it's like a ship with a compass. And so sometimes I tend to think that, like, the simpler logos can be a little bit more like effective in remembering what they are, but I'm not going to criticize the Clippers for that. Like, they are doing what they need to do. Just smile and nod. All right. How about picks for tonight?
Yeah, let's talk about the Miami Heat here. Heat are plus 6.5. You mentioned before we started the State of the Union that there's a bunch of players suspended. That does include Jimmy Butler. That does include Thomas Bryant. Josh Richardson still out with injury. Terry Rozier and Tyler Hero are both questionable for this game with injury concerns. I'm taking the zombie Heat here. This is the exact kind of spot where the Heat either hang in this game or win it. The Kings are coming off of what was was a pretty big win yesterday versus the Los Angeles Clippers. That was a monster win for them, trying to build steam for the playoff race. So this is a letdown spot for the Kings versus a squad that always competes better than the market expects when they're down and they're shorthanded. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Heat here, plus 6.5. I project this within a number that, even if I account for the injury and suspension absences for the Heat, I can't get to this number for the Kings. They haven't been that good this season, especially at home. So I'll grab the zombie Heat here, plus 6.5.
Yes, maybe a bit undervalued tonight. And according to the Action app, bets are split about 50-50 on this game, but the Heat have garnered around 90% of the money. Mr. President, thank you so much for joining.
God bless you. God bless the NBA.
And for more on this game, we go to one of your cabinet members, Jim Turvey, via the Buckets podcast.
I've got Malik Monk over 16.5 points. He is streaky, and it's, that's hard to keep track of if you're a book, but he's in a hot streak right now. He's averaging 20.4 in his last 9 games. He's cleared this number in 8 of those last 9 games. He's also streaky in terms of usage and minutes as well. This is also a back-to-back for them, and one thing I noticed is that his minutes go pretty notably up in back-to-backs this season. He goes up from 25.9 overall to 30.4 in back-to-backs, and it makes sense. He is a bench player. You want to rely on your bench maybe a little bit more in those back-to-backs. He has more of a potential ceiling to add on to those minutes, whereas, the main starters who are maybe going to be a little bit more tired on back-to-back, you're going to rely on them a little bit less. So this is a Heat team that, this could go many different ways. This game could be close, and I actually kind of lean towards taking the points with the Heat with you. That's like zombie Heat is like a classic take the points with them. But if this gets out of hand, Monk, he can get minutes with the mop-up unit as well. So he's a little bit more, script proof than some of the other guys in this game. So add that all together, and I'm on Malik Monk over 16.5 points.
To college basketball now, and Mike Calabrese is back with a pick for tonight. But before we do that, this topic of court storming is back in the news because Duke's Kyle Filipowski was injured after the loss to Wake Forest. What's your take on this whole situation?
Court storming, I think it's just a part of the fabric of college sports, the excitement. Now, there's times when it happens that it shouldn't. I think there's basically a guideline for what's a true upset, what's a meaningful win. But let's put that aside for a moment. Really, the issue here is protecting the players, which I think should be paramount. But this idea that the only way you can protect them is by never having court stormings or arresting every single person who goes on the floor that's not authorized to be there. That's Jay Billis's idea. I think that's all ridiculous. The fact of the matter is they keep handing out fines to these schools. Where does that money go? How about this? It's an election year, so I'm putting my hat in the ring for an election idea. You can make me, U.S. Treasury Secretary. Take all the fine money and give it to all the schools, all the conference, affiliated schools, and have a security detail. Because I can say this, when I was a freshman at the University of Missouri, I stormed the court. We upset our rival, Kansas. They were top 10. We weren't having a good year. And one thing I remember from storming the court is that Kansas brought state troopers with them. They basically circled the players. They made sure they got out. I think I saw a shotgun in one of their hands. The bottom line was I was not taking a step in their direction. So the fact is they had security, they had a plan, they had an exit route, and they took care of it. Like these situations, whether it was Caitlin Clark getting bumped into or Flip, last night or 2 nights ago, all of it comes down to kind of these instances where the players are totally separated from everybody else. There should be a game plan, get together, circle it up, get off the floor. And I don't think they should have to pay for that. I think if there's a fine, that should be covered, across the entire conference, because a lot of money gets thrown around. There's 6-figure numbers in terms of fines. I'm a job creation person. There's plenty of state troopers who need a little extra overtime on the side, however you want to do the private bodyguards. I think that's the way to go. And that way you get the best of everything. You get some money in the pockets of hardworking folks, and you allow 18, 19-year-olds still have fun. This is one of the last opportunities to kind of act like a Yahoo and do it without hurting people. I think that's kind of the end game here.
For what it's worth, you would totally have my vote for president of the NCAA or what have you. But you mentioned some of the 6-figure fines, but I think a big problem here is the inconsistencies across the different conferences. Mm-hmm. Some of these fines, like the Big East, for example, it's like a $5,000 fine. It's like absolutely nothing. So I think the governing bodies of each conference have to really come together and create a better, more proactive strategy to deal with this? Because the answer is not do nothing. I do really fear that someone could get seriously hurt. So like absolutely something needs to be done. It needs to be taken more seriously. I worry about even the security detail aspect of it, because sometimes this is happening before the game, the buzzer even sounds, and it's like bodies coming from all angles, and it's just so hard to predict where like a collision might occur. But I do agree that like you don't want to lose it completely and lose like sort of that magic and that memory for so many students. But we got to do better. Like we absolutely have to do better. In other news, though, you know, over the weekend, Houston became the new #1 team in the nation because they beat Baylor. Bears are now 15th in the AP poll. They're on the road tonight at TCU. How are you betting this game?
I like over. I'd go all the way up to 149. You got to keep in mind the last time these two teams played, it was 76-76 and regulation. They played, I believe, a triple overtime game that went, into the 200s. But both of these teams, I think, bring out the best in the other team's offense. So TCU leads the nation in fast break points at almost 20 per game. They're going to push the tempo, and I'm not sure that Baylor really has the defense to slow them down. They're a bottom third defense in the Big 12, according to Evan Maya, and they're hovering right around that's just the brink of the top 100 in terms of defensive efficiency by Bart Torvik. So they can certainly be taken advantage of on the defensive end. And then Baylor has a huge calling card, which is they're the second most accurate three-point shooting team in the entire country. They're burying 40.3% of their triples, and they're coming off a game where they're able to score and hang around with the Houston defense that is suffocating, nonstop pressure, great perimeter defenders. TCU is not going to be able to throw pressure in waves at them in the same way. So I think there's a chance for either of these teams to kind of build up a 5 to 6 point lead in the last 90 seconds. And if that's the case, you get some point padding with the foul shooting. So I'm going to go over 148 right now in the market. And like I said, I play it all the way up to 150.
Well, for more of these types of picks from Mike Calabrese, make sure you catch BBOC. A new episode will be streaming on Tuesday. And you had a nice showing over the weekend, 5-0, I believe, in best bets.
It's better to be lucky than good. I did get the player over. It required overtime, but it still counts just the same. I've lost plenty of heartbreakers in OT, so I'll take it, hoping to keep the good times rolling on Tuesday.
You got to take it. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
To the NHL, the Stars are currently first place in the Central Division. In preseason, their odds were plus 300 to win said division. Now they're at plus 160. Only the Jets have shorter odds, while the Avalanche are in third at around plus 300. With that, we bring in our hockey expert, Andy Macneil. What's your pick for the Central at this point?
Well, I think there's too much stock being put into the fact that Winnipeg has games in hand, 3 games, in fact, over both the Stars and the Avalanche. I don't think the Jets should be the odds-on favorite to win the Central Division. Dallas has a much easier remaining schedule than both the Avalanche and the Jets, at least according to my strength of schedule metric. And objectively, they're the better team. Over the last 30 days, Dallas ranks 7th in goals per 60 minutes and 8th in goals against per 60 minutes. Meanwhile, Colorado and Winnipeg ranked 21st and 28th on offense and 12th and 17th on defense, respectively. So there's a big gap between the Stars and the rest of the competition. Winnipeg and Colorado do currently have more regulation wins than the Stars, and that is a tiebreaker should they finish with the same amount of points. But according to my projections, the Stars have a 57% chance of winning the Central Division. So there's value betting on them at plus 160. But as you mentioned, there was a lot more value betting on them preseason when they were around 3-1.
Well, hindsight is what it is, Andy. Dallas hosting the Islanders tonight. How are you betting this game?
Well, I think if you asked 1,000 hockey fans what teams go over full games totals the most, they probably would not say the Stars and the Islanders. And that has a lot to do, I think, with people putting too much stock into goaltending and defense, things that the Islanders and Stars typically do very well. Not to mention the fact that the Islanders head coach in a lopsided game like we saw against the St. Louis Blues last week is not afraid to pull the goalie with 10 minutes remaining in a game like that. Patrick Waugh is known for that, so we could have that going in our favor. But these two teams, respectively, Dallas is 31 and 23 to the over, while the Islanders are 35 and 23 to the over. So I like over 6.5 here at -110. I think this is going to be a pretty high pace game. And we've got the backup goalie starting for the Dallas Stars, Scott Wedgwood. He hasn't won a game in over a month, and will definitely be a downgrade over starter Jake Ottinger.
And while we're on the topic of Dallas, they go on the road to face the aforementioned Avalanche. Early pick for that one?
Yeah, well, this is going to be a tough spot for the Stars. It will be their 6th game in 9 days, and playing in Denver on short turnaround like this is never easy. In fact, the Avalanche have gone 4-0 as the home team this season against teams playing on the second half of a back-to-back. Dallas has been in this situation on the road 8 times this season. They're 4-4 straight up. I think they're going to buck this trend on Tuesday with backup goalie Scott Wedgwood starting on Monday. As I mentioned, Jake Ottinger clearing the way for him to start on Tuesday. He'll be fresh against this Avs team that has had a lot of trouble keeping goals out of their own net recently. Dallas is scoring just as many goals as the Avalanche have been this season. So plus 120 on the money line at DraftKings Sportsbook. I think this game should resemble more of a pick'em price, and I imagine it'll get there.
Well, we appreciate the heads up. Colorado just 3 points back of Dallas and 2 points back of Winnipeg in the Central currently. Andy, thanks again.
For sure, anytime.
Remember, any picks we give out here on the show, like the ones you just heard from Andy, you can easily reference by following Green Dot Daily in the Action app. We keep track so you don't have to. That's all for this episode of Green Dot Daily. I'm Maria Marino. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again Tuesday at 3 Eastern on the Action Network YouTube channel and the Action app.